Alright, so, hold on.
Man, Dan!
Don't sit by me, baby.
I'm so mad.
Ron!
Sir, one old son.
No, do not recall it.
Alright, so we are in Job. So everybody open up your Bible to the book of Job. We're continuing our duty. Yeah. And you know, Job, some of y'all are having a bad week because of finals. Job
Does anybody need one?
really knew what a bad
Are you
week
getting
was.
about?
Yeah, anybody need a roll? He really knew what a bad day was about. He had a bad year, you know. So tonight, yeah, exactly. So tonight we're going to look at round 2, because last week it was all of chapter 1 was kind of laying the groundwork, kind of building the foundation for everything, and we talked about kind of the first round of attacks that Satan made on Job, and that was round 1. And most of us, if that happened in our life, at the end of all of that, that would be enough to really put us into kind of a depression that we might not even come out of. But at the end of that, at the end of chapter 1, remember that Job, the picture we have of Job is that it says, then Job stood up, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So Job's response to all of that loss was to worship, which totally different than a lot of our response sometimes, but Job was a righteous man, okay? And you would think things would be good enough for Satan to leave him alone there, but it gets worse. And so, as we look at round 2 of the attacks, which is chapter 2 in Job, there are some lessons I think that we can learn from the things that are going on in chapter 2. And these don't all necessarily have to do with Job. There are some different characters who come into the story at this point. And so as we work through chapter 2, we're just going to pull out kind of some life lessons. And so life lessons from round number 2. And the first life lesson is not really in round number 2, but or is not in chapter 2, but it's just kind of inherent, I guess you could say, in the story, and that is sometimes suffering is just part of life. Okay? So if you're taking notes, write that down. Sometimes suffering is just part of life. Job is a book on suffering. It is the book in the Bible that answers the question, if God is love and God is in control, then why does God allow people that He loves to suffer? And so this whole book deals with suffering and gives us an answer to that question. Okay? One of the things that we need to understand is that suffering is just a part of life. Sometimes we suffer because of bad decisions that we make, right? You guys know the laws of physics. And one of the laws of physics says for every action, there is what?
Equal and opposite reaction.
Equal and opposite reaction. Thank you, Mary Margaret, for demonstrating that. And so the idea there that's behind that is this concept of cause and effect. And so sometimes the things that we do, the decisions that we make, have the effect of bringing suffering into our lives. Okay? So, for instance, you go out with your friends, you do some stupid stuff, maybe there's alcohol at a party, you drink, you drive, you have an accident, and you're paralyzed for the rest of your life. That is some suffering that was brought on in your life because of your bad decisions. Okay? So sometimes suffering comes from our own bad decisions. Sometimes suffering comes from the bad decisions of other people. We didn't do anything wrong, but somebody else made a bad decision, right? Same story. You go out on Friday night with some of your friends, there's alcohol at the party, you end up drinking, then you get behind the wheel of a car, and you run through a red light, plow into a minivan, and kill half the kids, paralyze the mom, dad is brain damaged for the rest of his life. Now these people are dealing with suffering, not because of a decision they made, but because of a decision that somebody else made, right? So sometimes we endure suffering because of somebody else's bad decision, and then sometimes we deal with suffering simply because we live in a broken world. The world has been broken because of sin. And from the moment sin entered into the picture, we've talked about this before, it wasn't just us and our spiritual lives that were affected. The entire creation was affected by sin, so that there are things that happen like hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, which Alaska is still suffering from aftershocks of earthquakes. It's a pretty big deal when the aftershock is like a 5.0 on the Richter scale. You know what I'm saying? So Alaska is, California, there's wildfires. You know, in other parts of the country, there's snowstorms. All of these things are the result of sin entering the world and creating a fallen creation, a broken creation. The world's broken, and sometimes we suffer because of that. Okay? All of us are going to suffer, and sometimes that suffering is just a part of life. There's not like a bigger motive behind it. You guys get what I'm saying on that? That's important. But then sometimes suffering has a purpose. Sometimes God sanctions suffering for our good and His glory. So tonight there's going to be a few verses that pop up, kind of like this James 1, 2 through 12, some support verses. So somebody go ahead, when you see that verse, just go ahead and turn to it so that you can read it for us in a little while. But we're going to start out, though, in Job. Sometimes God sanctions suffering for our good and His glory. Listen to what Job chapter 2 says. One day, the sons of God came again to present themselves before the Lord. Same story, different day. And Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord asked Satan, "Where have you come from?" "From roaming through the earth," Satan answered him, "and walking around on it." In other words, what did we learn from that last week? Satan was doing what? Stirring up trouble. That's what we said last week. When you hear him saying he's roaming through the earth, he's not just hanging out, chatting with people. He's stirring stuff up. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? No one else on earth is like him." Doesn't this sound just like what he said in the first encounter? "A man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil. He still retains his integrity even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason." So he's saying, even though I let you attack him to prove the true nature of his faith, even though I allowed you to take everything from him, he still worships me. And see, I win. Right? That's proof that his faith is the real deal. Okay? Skin for skin, Satan answered the Lord. And that skin for skin, basically what he's saying is, hey, a man will do anything to save his own skin. Hey, God, you took everything from him, but you didn't affect him personally. Like physically, you didn't attack him. You didn't take anything physically from him. And really, all Job is worried about is himself. He doesn't care about any of this other stuff that he's lost, because Job is only worried about who? Job. And as long as Job is okay, he doesn't care that you've taken anything else. That's what Satan is saying here. Satan answered the Lord, "A man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." "Very well," the Lord told Satan, He is in your power. Only spare his life." So Satan left the Lord's presence and infected Job with terrible boils from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery to scrape himself while he sat among the ashes. Now we don't know exactly what it is that he was infected with. I read a lot of this week, and some scholars say that it might have been leprosy, which we know that that's a really bad disease. Literally your body parts rot off, okay? Others say it could have been something called elephantitis.
Elephantitis.
Yes.
Works 500.
That's it. And basically, you with that disease, you swell up, and your skin will actually kind of split open, and so you get to the point where it doesn't even look like you have joints anymore because you swell up so much. You kind of look like a packed sausage, I guess you could say. We don't know exactly what it was, but we know it was bad, and we know that as far as Job could tell, as far as Job knew, and even the people around Job knew, they thought it was terminal. It didn't look like there was any chance of recovery. Okay, so Satan really attacked him, and it's hard to look at this and go, wait a minute, Wayne, you're saying that sometimes God sanctions suffering for our good and His glory? Well, God had already received glory, had He not? When Job endured the suffering that he went through, and instead of cursing God, what did he do? He praised God. That resulted in God receiving glory. Okay? Now, Job hasn't, at this point in the story, Job hasn't experienced any benefits yet, right? But we know the end of the story. That's the beautiful thing about the Bible, is that we can go read the end of the story before we even read the beginning. And we know that in the end of this, Job does what? He gets back double what he had before, right? And so God is going to bless him in the end. And that's an important point for us to remember, is that God never brings suffering in your life, or never allows suffering in your life, when He's not in some way going to reward you for your faithfulness during the suffering. And I believe that's what Romans 8:28 teaches us, right? For we know that in all things, what? God works for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purposes. That verse does not promise us that God is going to remove us from suffering, right? That He's going to save us from suffering. It promises us that He's going to help us bear up in suffering. And that on the other side of that suffering, we are going to experience a blessing that comes from as an outcome of our faithfulness during the suffering. Okay? So, this is what we have going on here. Job's in the middle of it right now. He's not seeing that there's an end coming. Okay? Who has James chapter 1? Because James chapter 1 expands on this a little bit, and what gives us kind of an idea of what God is doing in the midst of suffering. So who has that? All right, Zach, read it loud.
Consider it a great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. Now if any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith without doubting, for the doubter is like the surging sea, driven and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded and unstable in all his ways. Let the brother of humble circumstances boast in his exaltation, but let the rich boast in his humiliation, because he will pass away like a flower of the field. But the sun rises, and together with the scorching wind dries up the grass, its flower falls off, and its beautiful appearance perishes. In the same way, the rich person will wither away while pursuing his activities. Blessed is the one who endures trials, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him.
All right. So, verse 2 says, consider it a great what? joy whenever you experience various trials. Then it goes a little bit further down and says, if you don't understand in the midst of your suffering, in the midst of your trial, if you don't understand what's all going on here, what are you supposed to do? Well, he says, now if any of you, what? Lacks wisdom, he should ask God. So if you're in the midst of it and you're having a hard time, understanding why God is allowing this suffering in your life, what is the proper response? Is to ask God for wisdom. That's what James is saying right here. Now look, here's what's interesting, is that in a way, this is what Job ends up doing in the midst of his suffering. He's constantly calling out to God. Why are you doing this, God? Why are you allowing this to happen? What have I done to you, God? Okay? And in the end, guess what God gives him? Wisdom. Right? Now I told y'all, you need to be reading this as we're studying it. Okay? As part of your quiet time or whatever. Because this is good stuff. It's going to help you in your life. And so, one of the things we learn from chapter 2 is that sometimes God sanctions suffering for our good and His glory. Right? Moving along.
Like, you can think about it, I feel like, you can think about it like relationships. Sorry, I know, I just.
No, you're good, go ahead.
It's just like you date somebody and you, like, get, like, really far in a relationship and you think that they're, like, so great, but then you start to see things that are not working out. Like, maybe it's a 51-49 relationship. They're taking a little more than they're giving, and you realize that's not right, but then you can take that risk. Even though it might hurt for a while, because you have to.
You learn something from the process.
And it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
Yeah, that's true. And that's the thing, is that God never lets you go through suffering when He doesn't want you to learn something from it, right? I mean, that's part of what He's doing, is He's refining you. He's causing you to rely on Him more. He's changing your perspective on things. I can tell you this, people who endure suffering have more mercy for people who are going through suffering. You get what I'm saying? Once you've hurt, you have a better ability to empathize with people who are hurting. Okay? Some of the most loving people are people who have the least. People who have suffered the most become some of the most loving people, the most giving people, the most sacrificing people. And so I think God lets us, one of the reasons that God lets us go through suffering is to increase our wisdom, but that doesn't just mean we get smarter. We have this idea that wisdom is about being smart, right? Like a wise old owl or something. But it's more than that. It's emotional IQ. It's social IQ. You get what I'm saying there? It's being able to empathize with others and to understand a perspective that's different than our own. You get what I'm saying? And sometimes I think God lets us go through suffering to transform us, to change us. I mean, you guys know, like, when gold's taken out of the ground, right? What's it always interlaced inside of it? Rock, right? Okay? Nobody, like, digs up a ring from the ground. Like, it doesn't come out in gold bricks. You get what I'm saying? It doesn't come out in necklaces. It's like this ugly rock, okay? And it's got gold in it. So what they do is they have to take it and they put it in a smelter. And what does that do? It smelts. It melts the gold out of it, right? And so it's a furnace. Now, I know gold doesn't have feelings, but let's say gold did have feelings. I'm pretty sure that in the midst of the furnace, the gold is going, whoo, this hurts. This is hot.
It's basically being
You know,
liquefied, yeah.
why?
Warm feeling.
What's going on with this? I mean,
Feelings.
you're changing my shape. You're transforming. You're doing something with me. I don't like this. But in the end, that gold is what? Refined. And so sometimes God allows us to go through suffering because He's refining us. Does that make sense? I mean, I know you guys know that. So, and this little picture right here, that last squat rep got me like, okay?
Seriously, that could
I mean, here's the deal. A lot of us in here do some type of exercise. Okay? You exercise your
I think I know
mind.
that.
Studying is a form of exercise, I guess you could say, for your mental muscles. And it's never fun, right? Like Zach and I, we work out every day except for Wednesday and Sunday. And even just like yesterday, we were running and Zach was like, I don't want to run. And I'm like, well, this is what we're doing today. And Wendy and I got into this big conversation because Wendy didn't want to do the workout we were doing. And I'm like, she says, why do we have to do this? Let's do something that's easier. And I'm like, well, then it's not working out, right? Because, I mean, the word, yeah, I know. She's watching it. Oh, my Lord.
Hi, Miss Wendy.
But like the idea behind working out, I mean, it's in the name, right? Work. It's not supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be hard. And we put ourselves through that pain, those of us who do it, regularly and often, because we want to add a few years to our life, or we want to be a little bit more mobile later on in years, or we want to look buff, you know, like we're trying to be attractive or something like that. Okay? There's a reason that we go through it. We're trying to get a benefit from it, and so we're willing to put up with the suffering and pain. I think that when God allows us to go through trials, and He lets us go through hard times, and He lets us go through suffering, think of it as like God's working you out. It's never fun while it's going on. But you can rest assured that in the end there's going to be a beneficial outcome, right? And you may never understand or even be able to comprehend what that could be in the midst of it, right? But in the long term, God's doing something that's for your good, all right? So sometimes God sanctions suffering for our good and His glory. Now, moving along. Sometimes the worst advice comes from those closest to us. How many of y'all have ever experienced this?
Me.
Okay.
Literally just.
Sometimes the worst advice comes from those closest to us. Look at this. Poor old Job. The worst thing that happened is Satan left his wife alive. Now, that sounds mean, but look at what his wife does. His wife is one of his biggest antagonists. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." "You speak as a foolish woman speaks," he told her. "Should we accept only good from God and not adversity?" Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding on to your integrity?" Okay? Basically, she's saying, do you still claim that you're innocent? Because remember, well, you're going to see this more as this book continues to unfold. But the idea was that if you are a righteous person, God blesses you. But if you are an evil person, guess what God does to you? God punishes you. He curses you. This was the idea of the day. So when bad things, and this is why we said last week, don't always assume that because something bad is happening to you or somebody else, that you've done something to deserve it. That's why this first point is important. Sometimes suffering is just part of life, right? And then what we kind of ended with last week is that if you are a person who's trying to please God, your chances of suffering don't go down. They actually do what, according to Jesus? They go up, okay? So, but there was this idea that if you are suffering, if something bad is happening in your life, then you have done something to make God mad, and so He's punishing you. And so Job's wife is saying, do you still claim that you're innocent? Now remember, Job's wife has also lost all of her camels, all of her sheep, all of her donkeys, all of her oxen, and she's also lost her children. And what do you think hurt Mama the worst? Losing those kids, right? Mamas love their babies, okay? And so this mother's heart is broken. This mother's heart is grieving, and she's blaming Job. She says, do you still hold on to your integrity? Do you still claim that you're innocent? In other words, she's saying, Job, this is all your fault. She's blaming every bit of it on you. Then she says, just curse God. Just curse God. Job, do you think she was doing that in her heart? Yeah. Who is she mad at? She's mad at God. Because she is blaming all of this on Job, but she's also giving some blame to God as well. and she's like, Job, just curse God. And then she says, and just die. Basically what she's telling him is, Job, just commit suicide. Just kill yourself. Curse God and kill yourself. Alright? Again, sometimes the worst advice comes from those closest to us. Why? Well, number one, they think they know us. Two, they're really close to the situation sometimes. But it is exactly their proximity to the situation that causes them to give you bad advice. Sometimes when we're in a tight spot, the best advice can come from somebody outside of the situation who can kind of give you an outsider's perspective. Right? When we were at the revitalization conference, Brother Jeff and I, one of the speakers talked about churches who start declining. And they'll get to a point where their finances are hurting, their numbers have gotten really low, and they go into like a self-preservation mode, right? And what this speaker explained to us is that he had a friend who was a pilot, like a flight instructor. And this flight instructor talked about pilots who fly by, during the daytime, a lot of pilots will fly by what they can see. You can see the horizon out there, so you fly kind of by the seat of your pants, what feels right. But at night, you can't see the horizon. You can't see the features around you, land and stuff like that. So you don't know if you're going up or down, or if you're about to crash into the ground, or what. So you have to fly by instruments, and you have to trust the instruments. Well, some pilots have never learned to fly by instruments. So if they get caught in the dark, they can get in a lot of trouble because they'll start trying to base what they do in the plane on what feels right according to their equilibrium, like your sense of balance and stuff like that. But have any of you ever been like in the dark and noticed how easy it is to lose your balance and to lose your sense of equilibrium? So what these pilots will sometimes do as they're trying to fly by feeling is they'll start making decisions based on the way they feel, but every little decision they make actually puts them in more danger. And so they could even end up flying almost upside down and not even realize it because their brains are tricking them into feeling like this is the way to go. And so what ends up happening, they die, they crash. And so what they were applying that to is that a lot of times churches, when they're on the decline, they call that a death spiral. So that churches will start making decisions that feel right to them, right? But they're the worst decisions they can make because all they do is make their situation worse. So like their finances are looking bad, so they start saying stuff like, well, we got to quit spending money on reaching people and spend money on like keeping our facilities open. You get what I'm saying here? Well, that's a problem. That's a death spiral thing because what's the only way that you're going to come out of your problem? To reach people, right? And so, that's church-wise. The same thing can happen in your life. When you're in the midst of suffering, you're in the midst of pain, and the people around you are experiencing this pain with you, they will give you advice that feels right, sounds right, even makes sense. But it's death spiral advice. You get what I'm saying? And a lot of times, people outside of the situation can give you a more objective answer, kind of like flying by your instruments. Because guess what? When you're in an airplane, it doesn't matter what you feel. Guess what never lies? The instruments. You get what I'm saying? That's why we live by this. Are y'all with me on this? Because it doesn't matter how you feel. Guess what never changes? This. Right? That's why we orient our life by this. Okay? And so sometimes you need to get some people outside the situation to speak into the situation that can give you good objective advice. All right? Sometimes the worst advice comes from those closest to us. Now, Job's response to her was very nice. right? I mean, she basically just said, this is all your fault, curse God, kill yourself. And instead of going off on her, okay, he says, you speak as a foolish woman speaks. Notice he didn't say, you are a foolish woman. Right? Did he say that? He said, you speak as a foolish woman. In other words, listen to yourself. This doesn't make sense what you're saying. Should we accept only good from God and not adversity? Throughout all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Why did Job respond to her that way? Because I'm sure some of us, if we were in that situation and someone really close to us tried to pin all the blame on us and tell us, hey, you just need to curse God and go off and die somewhere. If someone said something that hurtful to us, our response would be equally hurtful, right? Well, I think Job understood that sometimes hurting people hurt other people. Have you ever experienced that? That hurting people hurt other people? Have you ever hurt somebody because you were hurting? Yeah? Have you ever been hurt by somebody who was hurting? It's like you didn't do anything to deserve it. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? And you caught their fury. You with me on that? It's like they had a bad day and they come home and you're the first person they run into. Oh, Carrie's looking at Jack. So does this happen at home? So is it Carrie that comes home and blows up at Jack, or is it the other way around? It's like you have a bad day, or somebody has a bad day, and they come home, and it's like they just lay into everybody. You get what I'm saying? Okay?
That's me.
Or one of your friends comes to school and they've had a bad morning, and suddenly your best friend becomes your worst enemy. You know what I'm saying? Or sometimes in the workplace, like there's kind of this saying in the work world, it's like leave your junk at home. In other words, don't bring it to work with you. But guess what? People don't do that. Sometimes they have some stuff going on in their life, and they bring it to work with them, and they are toxic to everybody around them. Why? Because hurting people hurt people. Right? Rick Warren talks about this, and so I want to show you this little video. It's like 2.5 minutes. But he explains this very well. So listen to what he has to say.
Now, I've said this many times. Hurt people hurt people. When somebody's hurting you, it's because they've been hurt and they are still hurting. Unkind people are people who've never felt kindness. Unloving people are people who feel unloved. When somebody is rude, bitter, unkind, sarcastic, mean-spirited, arrogant, attacking, they are shouting with all of their behaviors, I need massive doses of love. I do not feel loved. I do not feel secure. Because secure, loved people don't act that way. They're not rude. They're not judgmental. They're not unkind. They're not attacking. The person who feels deeply loved and deeply secure is generous and gracious to other people. When somebody is mean and cranky, they are telegraphing in as loud terms as possible, I am in pain. And what they need is not what they deserve. Now, you have to decide, am I going to overcome evil with good, or am I going to just retaliate on their level? You see, when you attack somebody, it puts you below them. When you get even with somebody, it puts you on the same level. When you respond with love and kindness, it puts you above them, morally superior. Now, if you want to just get even with people, fine. You're no better than they are. That's when you get even, you are no better than the person who has attacked you. To be better than that person, you overcome evil with good. You respond with love. You look past their words to their pain. Edwin Markham wrote a very short poem that's famous, and it goes like this. They drew a circle that shut me out. A heretic, a rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took them in. I will not allow anyone to have the satisfaction of making me their enemy. They may hate me, but I will never hate them. Why? Because I'm not going to be even with them. I'm not going to be on their level. I'm going to be better. I'm going to do the Jesus thing. I'm going to look past their words and look at their pain.
So hurting people hurt other people. And you and I know this to be true because we have those kinds of people in our lives, right? There are times when some of y'all are even like this. You're hurting, and so you hurt other people, right? And so that's one of the things that we learn from this. And that the way to respond is like Job responded. Job didn't knock her legs out from under her. Job didn't punch her in the teeth. Job didn't say, "Woman, how dare you speak to me that way?" What did Job do? He drew her back to God. He says, "You speak as a foolish woman speaks. Should we accept only good from God and not adversity?" So rather than attacking her, he pointed her back to God. Right? All right. Sometimes we need good friends. Look at, and let me say this as we start this last little section here. Job's friends, Zophar, Eliphaz, Bildad, and then Elihu comes up later on in the story. These guys have gotten a super bad reputation over the years. Everybody talks bad about Job's friends. But I'm going to tell you something. Job's friends, they ended up, they gave him some bad advice, right? You get what I'm saying? But we should not question their loyalty. They were good friends. And we could learn something from the kinds of friends that they were to Job. Okay? The fact is, they were off on their reasons for why God was allowing this to happen to Job. But guess what? Job was off as well. Nobody had a clue. And so we get to sit around and watch all of these guys have these conversations in the next 20-something chapters about why they thought what was happening. But the fact of the matter is, while everybody else was disregarding Job and had turned their backs on Job, even his own wife, what were these guys doing? They were there with him. Okay? So this is important. Now when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all this adversity that had happened to him, each of them came from his home. They met together to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize him. They wept aloud, and each man tore his robe and threw dust into the air and on his head. Then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and nights, but no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense. So what do we learn about these guys? I would say these guys were great friends. True friends care. What does it say they did when they heard about all that had happened?
Left their jobs.
Huh?
What's what it said in my version? They left their jobs.
They left their jobs. That's good, okay? Mine says they came to him. Each of them came from his home. Now these guys didn't just live down the street. You get what I'm saying? There were a little bit of a journey involved here. But when they heard that their friend was hurting, what did they do? They dropped what they were doing and they came. You have any friends in your life that if something were going on with them, you would drop what you were doing and you'd go to help them? I have some friends right now who live in other states. And if I knew something was going on with them, I'd get on an airplane or I'd drive through the night to get there to be there for my friends. You get what I'm saying? And I know those same friends that if I called them up and said, "Hey, I need you to come to Meridian and I need you to," I know that they would do the same thing for me. Good friends, true friends, care they interrupt their lives. True friends come, they make the journey. They did not require Job to come to them. They didn't say, hey Job, if you come to my house, I'll sit down and talk with you. You get what I'm saying? And look, guess what? A trip of any sort costs you a little bit, right? They didn't get there and say, hey Job, man, the gas for my camel was pretty expensive. Have you seen camel gas prices lately? You know what I'm saying? They didn't say that. They didn't say, hey, I used half a hump of gas to get here today, or a whole hump. You know, I had to stop and fill my hump up twice. You know, and say, hey, can you cover my gas to come to you? Hey, I had to stop and eat a few times. Can you cover my meal? You get what I'm saying? This cost them something, but they sacrificed. They came for Job. So true friends care, true friends come, and almost, perhaps most importantly, true friends cry. It says, listen, these are men now, right? These are men. And it says, when they looked from a distance, they could barely recognize Job, and they wept aloud. These guys weren't just kind of sitting over to the side doing their man thing with a mean look on their face and a silent tear, right, rolling down the side of their face. These guys were broken for Job. They were weeping aloud. And they were doing it all together. I kind of see these guys standing in a circle going, have you seen him? And just bursting out in tears for their friend Job. They wept aloud, and each man tore his robe. That's a sign of pain. And threw dust in the air and on his head. So all of these were signs of mourning. You guys follow me on this? And so they sympathized and they hurt with him. And then it says they sat on the ground with him how long?
7 days.
7 days and nights. But no one spoke a word to him because they saw that his suffering was very intense. We can learn a lot from this right here. Is this the kind of friend you are? Are you the kind of friend that cares enough to come? Do you care enough to cry? Do you sympathize with your friends? Do you empathize with them when they're hurting? So sometimes we need good friends. And then the one thing that I take away from these guys is that sometimes the best thing we can offer is our presence. Notice in verse 13, it says, then they sat on the ground with him 7 days and 7 nights, but no one spoke a word because they saw his suffering was very intense. I've had friends who have lost loved ones. Many of us have, right? And when you go into that situation, a lot of times you don't know what to say. And you're scared you're going to say the wrong thing. In 20-something years of ministry, one of the biggest things that I have learned about ministering to people in their time of need is that your presence counts way more than anything you say. You hear what I'm saying? When people are hurting, they don't want to be alone. They don't expect us to have the answers to their suffering, right? They don't expect us to understand why things happen the way they have. They just don't want to be alone in their pain. And sometimes the best thing that we can do for our friends who are hurting is just be there for them. Okay? Look at, who's got 1 Corinthians 1:26? You got it? Read it loud, Judson.
For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing. Things to bring to nothing, bring nothing. Things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And I, when I come to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ, and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling.
Pause right there. He says, I came to you in what? Weakness, in fear, and in much trembling.
And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God.
So Paul says, hey, when I came to you in weakness, I came to you in fear, I came to you with much trembling, and guess what I didn't do? I didn't share these lofty words of wisdom with you that answered all your questions, but you saw the power of the Spirit, the power of the gospel demonstrated in my life. And here's what I'm trying to say to you. Here's what I think that passage teaches us, or at least a perspective of that passage. When you are dealing with people in times of fear, in times of trembling, in times of weakness, it's not your ability to provide a word of wisdom that matters. You get what I'm saying? It's your ability to demonstrate the power of God through love and service and sacrifice. That's what these guys did, right? They sacrificed, they came, they cried with them, they were with Job in his time of suffering and pain. Okay? This is all intensely practical stuff right here. Galatians 6:2. Who has that one? All right, go ahead, Zach. Read it loud.
Carry one another's burdens. In this way you will fulfill the law of Christ.
All right, what did it say? Carry one another's burdens. Did it say explain to one another why you have burdens? No. Did it say help your friend figure out how to get rid of his burden? No. What did it say? Carry one another's burdens. In other words, get this, it assumes that in this life there are going to be burdens. Right? And how do we demonstrate the love of God with people? By helping them to carry their burdens. This is important, guys. Sometimes the best thing we can offer is our presence. So, this is kind of what we're going to end with. How, then, can you be there for your hurting friends? Because I believe, as I was getting ready for tonight, everything drove up to Job's friends and what they did for Job, or what they were trying to do for Job. And so the practical takeaway for tonight is, what can we do when our friends are hurting? How can we be there for them? And the first thing I would suggest to you, and this isn't in the passage, this is just stuff that I've learned in all my years of ministry that is intensely practical. Number one, be positive, but not unrealistic. Listen, I'm telling you, when all these get up here, you take out your cameras, you need to take a picture of this. You're going to need this later in life. You're going to be in situations, I promise you, every adult in here can tell you they've been in situations where they haven't known what to do. Their friends were hurting, somebody had lost someone, somebody was sick in the hospital and possibly going to die, and you don't know what to do, you don't know how, and sometimes we avoid those situations. Listen, this is important. What did I say Job's friends did? They cared, they came, and they cried.
Comforted.
Listen to this right here. One of the best tests that you will ever have in your life for who your true friends are what happens in your times of suffering. When you are hurting, people who are just acquaintances feel uncomfortable with suffering, whether it's theirs or whether it's yours. So if they're just an acquaintance, guess what they're going to do when you're hurting? They are going to distance themselves because they don't want to deal with that. It's awkward, right? It's painful when you get close to somebody who's in a time of suffering. So the way that you know who your true friends are is that while everyone else is distancing themselves and running away from you, guess what your true friends are doing? They're running to you. Okay? That's important. But so let's say that you're that true friend and you're running to someone who's hurting. How can you be there? Because what did we just say? That the most important thing you can do is give them your presence. So how can you be there? Number one, be positive but not unrealistic. Remind them that God's in control, but avoid making promises or using cliches and stay true to the Bible. This is so important. We all, in those times of suffering, we want to be able to give our friends a word of encouragement. But let me tell you what ends up happening sometimes. We end up saying some stupid stuff. We end up saying some stuff that's not theologically accurate. Somebody loses a loved one, and we say stuff like, well, God just needed another angel in heaven. Y'all, that's not theologically sound. People don't become angels, right? We know that. Why do we say it? Because that person's hurting, and we want to say something to make them feel better. And we want to be positive. You should be positive, right? But don't be unrealistic. Don't tell lies. I had a friend who had to preach a sermon for a guy that he knew the guy was not saved. He knew he was lost. And he struggled for days. How do I encourage his family but not give them a false assurance of that this guy was in heaven? Because he had to be accurate, right? He had to tell the truth. And, you know, in the end, in the sermon, he said something to the effect of, none of us really know the exact state of so-and-so's heart when he died, what his relationship was with the Lord. But all we can know for sure is that he is in a place right now that was designed for people whose heart was like his.
What do you say?
That's the best you could say at a time like that. You get what I'm saying? He did not give him a false assurance. You get what I'm saying? The worst thing we can do is tell people stuff that's theologically not right. You get what I'm saying? Or don't, whatever you do, don't make promises. Like, I've been visiting people in the hospital before who were not doing well at all. And have had people in the room that go, you just take my word for it. So-and-so's not going to die. I'm just praying for them, and I know that God's going to bring them through it. And then what happens 2 days later when that person dies? What are all those people in that room who heard that? What are they doing now? They're doubting God. Don't make promises like that because you don't know. You don't know how it's going to end up. You're a human being. You don't know. You can make a promise that you know whatever happens, God's in control. That's a promise you can make. You know whatever happens, God's working something out that we can't understand, that we can't see. That's a promise you can make. That's Romans 8:28, right? But be very careful when you're trying to encourage a friend that you be positive, but you not be unrealistic. Does that make sense to y'all? Is that good stuff? Okay? Here's thing number 2. Be polite. Don't make a joke out of other people's suffering. And I know that you go, wait a minute. Who would do that? Like, who would be like, so-and-so's gonna die. Who would do that? That's not exactly what, definitely don't do that, right? That'd be a bad thing. Okay, but let me explain something. This is something I've even struggled with in the past. Because I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of like a logical person. I like dealing with logic. When emotions get into the picture, I get very uncomfortable, right? And when people are hurting, like, I feel uncomfortable anyway, okay? I still try to minister to them because I love people. But, even though it doesn't show very well sometimes. But, because I know some of you aren't thinking that. But here's what I have done. I have been guilty of this. So this is more speaking from experience. I have at times tried to cut the tension of the moment, the negative emotion of the moment, by cracking a joke. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or telling a funny story, or getting everybody laughing, or getting their mind off the situation. You get what I'm saying? And my motive for doing that has been to try to lighten the mood. But to be honest with you, the reason I wanted to, I'm just being transparent right now. The reason I wanted to lighten the mood was more because I felt uncomfortable with the heaviness of the moment than for their benefit. Follow me on this? Sometimes people just need us to hurt them. Okay? So be polite, but don't make a joke out of people's pain. Maybe they need to feel the hurt so that they can grieve and move through the process. You get what I'm saying? And maybe I need to hurt with them so that I can learn something through the perspective as well. So, hopefully that makes sense. Be prayerful. You should pray with your friend and for your friend. When people are hurting, guess what? They are more open to spiritual things than at any other time in their life. When people are in the midst of suffering and pain and hurt. You will hear people pray and make bargains with God, people who normally wouldn't even speak God's name. You with me on this? Seize that opportunity. Pray with your friend. Don't just say, hey, I'm praying for you. And I would encourage you that you start right this moment, from this point forward, when somebody says to you, hey, will you pray about this? You go, I won't just pray about it away from you. Let's stop and let's pray right now. Pray with them. Because here's what we do, like as Christians, we'll tell somebody, yeah, I'll pray about that, and then guess what we go off and do? We forget. That makes us a liar. If you tell somebody you're going to do it, and then you don't do it, you are a liar. Okay? Best thing you can do, when somebody says, hey, will you pray about this? Say, not only will I pray for it later, let's stop and let's pray right now. Let me pray with you. And then later, I'll pray for you. You with me on this? Do that. That'll make you a better friend, I promise you. And it'll help you seize some opportunities to get people thinking in a spiritual direction that normally they wouldn't give you. And then finally, be persistent. Don't abandon your friend in their time of need. Sometimes it's not easy to minister to people who are hurting. Why? Because hurt people do what? Hurt people. There are some of y'all that are very difficult to minister to. Because you're hurting. But I won't abandon you, right? This group doesn't abandon one another. We realize hurt people hurt people. And so we're going to be persistent. So when your friends are being negative, when your friends are being hateful, when they're being rude in the midst of their pain, don't get mad and abandon them. Realize that hurt people, and be persistent. Okay? Y'all, this good stuff? All right, now would be the time to take out your phones and take pictures of this, if you're going to do that. If you haven't written it down, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to make that happen. 3, 2, 1.
Boy, Dan's gotta work on his camera angle,
You got that? Alright. So here's what all this boils down to. There's a modern myth that says the good life is one that is free from suffering of any kind, and that those who suffer are weak. Therefore, the life we should seek is one that's free of suffering. But the truth of the matter is that suffering is a part of life. And get this, without sadness, we would have no frame of reference for joy. Okay? We may never know exactly why we or others suffer, but we can do everything possible to be there and help people through suffering. That is exactly the example God set for us by sending Jesus. When Jesus came, what was God doing? Was God saving us from suffering? No. He was joining us in suffering. I mean, think about the life that Jesus had before coming to the earth. He's the king of all the universe, right? What did he give up in order to come down here and be born and placed in a manger and grow up a poor carpenter's son and live life basically homeless, right? Because we know that once he started his earthly ministry, he didn't have a home. He was homeless. Only to be, at the end of it all, beaten, tortured, crucified, to hang out with the sick and the lowly and the hurting, the sinful, to constantly have people, hey, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? To never even have a moment to himself. So much so that he would have to get up early in the morning just to go off so he could wake up before everybody else so he could go off and pray. Because he couldn't even be alone long enough because everybody wanted some of Jesus' time. Talk about somebody who knew what it was to suffer. And God didn't avoid suffering. He joined us in our suffering. He didn't just take us out of it. He came and joined in it. And Jesus gives us the example that we're supposed to set for other people. So, here are your questions. So I'm going to ask you to get into groups. Let's have Judson, Dan the man, Zach, Josh. Yeah, I took care of it. Let's have you four and like Matt, maybe.
Come on, Dad.
And then let's have but Jack and Cameron, y'all come over here and join me. And then Stacy, you come and sit down. And then
you silly sauce.
Carrie, you got nothing last week, so okay. Take these codes. You can join in with them. Well, last week Jan had to sit on the couch, so just don't hurt anybody else in your pain.
You want me to do the question?
Sure, they're gonna do the answer.
Okay. It says, Head, how have you bought into the